My parents suddenly returned to my life when someone lied to them that I had married a wealthy boss. So I played along and taught them a lesson. I'm 27. I work as a financial consultant at a large company. I haven't spoken to my parents for 8 years. I have an older sister, Celeste, 34. She's happily married and raising 2 kids. We talk occasionally, but we're not very close. When I was 19, something happened that made me cut off contact with my parents forever. You see, my parents are devout Catholics. They take their faith extremely seriously. From childhood, they expected my sister and me to strictly follow religious rules and live a life based entirely on those values. Instead of sending us to regular schools, they decided to homeschool us. They believed local schools didn't align with their views, so they took our education into their own hands. They had a clear picture of our future and pressured us heavily to choose one of 2 paths, either become mothers of many children or join a convent. To them, these were the only acceptable life choices within their community's traditions. My sister, who's 7 years older than me, had never dated, lived at home until she got married, rarely left our neighborhood beyond 15 kilometers, and barely participated in the outside world. Naturally, she was their favorite. When she turned 22, our parents arranged her marriage to Matthew, the son of my father's friend. At the wedding, they nitpicked everything, from the readings to how the Mass was conducted, even though it was led by an ordained priest. Luckily, Matthew turned out to be a great guy, and Celeste has a good life and wonderful kids. But seeing her married off so young made me realize I wanted something different. Maybe she was fine with it, but I didn't want to follow the traditional path. I was a young woman full of dreams, ambition, and a passion for independence. I wanted a career, to travel, to explore the world. My vision of life clashed directly with what my parents thought was right. After high school, I desperately wanted to go to university. Despite their firm no, I applied to one of the best colleges in our district and was thrilled when I got a full scholarship, but when I told them, they were furious. My father threw a fit. He shouted, full of judgment and disappointment. My mother wouldn't even look at me. They couldn't understand why I wanted an education. In their eyes, I was supposed to stick to the plan they laid out. It was heartbreaking to see the people closest to me react with such anger to my dreams. That argument was the beginning of a growing rift between us that lasted for years. It became clear my dreams didn't match their vision of how my life should be. That moment marked the start of our complete estrangement. College opened up a whole new world for me. I learned things that made me question everything I'd been taught. I made new friends and felt the independence I'd never known before. But my parents couldn't handle these changes. They saw my independence and college experience as a threat to their values. Every holiday visit was tense and filled with misunderstandings. I felt like I was walking through a minefield, avoiding any topic that might start another argument. The gap between our beliefs only grew, and it became harder and harder to connect. Despite everything, part of me still craved their approval, but that remained an unreachable dream. After graduating, I was excited to find a job. I told my parents I wanted to build a career and would soon move out to follow my dreams. They were unhappy. They still wanted me to marry and have children according to their beliefs. Our arguments got nastier. Emotions ran high. They begged me to reconsider. When I refused to obey, they told me to leave their house immediately. I was shocked and hurt by how harshly and cruelly they reacted to a decision that made me so happy. I packed my things and moved in with my sister for a few months until I found my own place. That's when I promised myself I'd never go back to my parents' house. I wanted to live by my own rules and find success and happiness outside of their expectations. My decision to leave and pursue a career deeply wounded my parents. In response, they cut off all contact. Since then, when I talked to my sister, I never asked about our parents, and she never mentioned them. Now let's get to the actual story. I'd been dating my boyfriend for 3 years. 3 months ago, he proposed. We decided to have a simple, civil ceremony and then celebrate with a quiet dinner with close friends. I'm not into lavish weddings, and the fact that I couldn't invite my family was another reason to keep it small. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, and it was my parents. After all these years of silence, I couldn't believe it was them. Apparently, they'd heard about my wedding and wanted to congratulate me. I thanked them politely, but inside I was overwhelmed. They started asking how I was doing, and I responded with little enthusiasm. Everything was fine until they asked what it was like to be married to someone in such a high position at my company. Confused, I asked what they meant. Then they cheerfully said they were thrilled I'd married my boss. My jaw nearly dropped. I had no idea where they got that idea. They said someone they knew told them, and they were very happy for me. I stayed mostly silent while they went on and on about how proud they were that I finally got married. My dad was excited to meet my husband. My mom immediately asked if I planned to quit my job to focus on children and my husband's happiness. I was stunned. It slowly dawned on me that the only reason they suddenly reached out after 8 years was because they believed I'd married my boss, which in their eyes raised my social status. Now they expected me to become the perfect wife. Their patronizing tone and expectations made me furious. But I decided to play along. I painted a picture of a life that was partly true. My husband and I do live comfortably, but I added a ton of lies. 20 housekeepers, a giant mansion with a pool, and so on. They soaked it all up, and their excitement only grew, especially when they started begging to meet my rich husband. Their eagerness was pathetic, considering they only wanted to reconnect because of a lie about me marrying my boss. I agreed to arrange a meeting that weekend, and that's when a plan started forming in my head. I wanted to teach them a lesson, to make them realize the pain they caused by cutting me off just because I didn't fit their mold. Now they suddenly wanted back in my life, just to brag to their church friends. It was bitter, and I was determined to show them the consequences of their actions. I talked to my husband about the plan. He hesitated. He understood why I lied, but wasn't sure if meeting my parents under false pretenses was a good idea, especially for a first meeting. After some convincing, he agreed to go along with it. I also talked to my boss. Yes, my boss is a woman. Over the years, we've become good friends. I explained the situation, and she was amused by my parents' assumptions. I asked if we could use her house for a day, and she happily agreed. I sent my parents the address and set up the meeting they wanted so badly. On the day of the visit, my parents arrived at the house convinced they were about to meet my wealthy boss husband. Their eyes widened in shock when they saw the size of the house and the massive lawn. My husband and I met them at the door. My dad shook his hand with so much enthusiasm it looked like he wanted to rip his arm off. My mom hugged me and congratulated me on the marriage. Though my husband had doubts at first, he played his role perfectly. He greeted my parents with a smile, made small talk, and pretended to be the rich boss they thought he was. We sat down to eat, and my parents immediately noticed the staff serving our meal. My dad started grilling my husband about the house, his wealth, and how I managed to land a man like him. Even though the interrogation annoyed me, my husband made up an entire story to stay in character, about his fortune, his career, and how we met. All of this was part of our carefully planned game. In the middle of the conversation, my father, unable to contain himself, leaned forward with a sparkle in his eye and asked, "You know, I've always dreamed of seeing a collection of classic cars. You wouldn't happen to have a couple of vintage cars we could look at?" Mo played along and said yes, he had a few. The two of them went off to look at the car collection of my wealthy husband, which, in reality, belonged to my boss. Meanwhile, my mother stayed behind, came up to me, and in a lowered voice admitted, "You know, we're so happy you married a rich man because we're having trouble with the mortgage payments," she said worriedly. "We're afraid we might lose the house." I froze, staring at her in complete shock, and she went on, "Mo, since you're now married to a wealthy man and living in a mansion with vintage cars and a bunch of servants, you could probably convince him to help us with the payments. It hit me like a bolt of lightning. The only reason my parents reached out to me after all these years was because they hoped to benefit from my husband's wealth. They never actually cared about me. That was a painful realization, and a storm of emotions began to swirl inside me as I waited for my father and husband to return. The tension hung in the air. When they finally came back, I took a deep breath and decided, time for an honest conversation. I turned to my father and asked directly, "Is it true what Mom said?" He hesitated for a moment, then replied, "Well, honestly, I didn't expect you to get married at all, let alone to a rich man. And now that your husband has everything, it wouldn't hurt if he shared a little with us." My husband and I were shocked by his words. My father went on, explaining that he really didn't have the money for the mortgage and couldn't ask his friends for help. It would hurt his reputation. Seeing my parents' desperation and their conviction that they could easily take advantage of my husband's supposed wealth, I decided to carry out my revenge to the end. With a sly sparkle in my eye, I looked at my father and said, "You know what, Dad? We can help you with the mortgage. But there's one condition. You must first publicly apologize to me and admit you were wrong to cut me off 8 years ago. And you have to do it in front of the whole family and friends at a gathering we'll organize." My parents were stunned, but they didn't have much choice. They reluctantly agreed to my terms. Over the next few weeks, I organized a family gathering, inviting relatives and close friends. My sister didn't know the full story and was completely confused about why our parents suddenly wanted to reconnect with me. I had deliberately kept her out of my revenge plan, knowing her morals might get in the way and she might spill the beans. On the day of the event, it was nice to see my extended family after so many years and meet my parents' old friends. Everyone kept congratulating me on my marriage to my supposedly wealthy boss and constantly asking when we were planning to have kids. Their narrow-minded questions started to irritate me, but I smiled politely and responded without complaint, to keep up appearances. Amid the general excitement, my father decided to give a toast to draw attention. He stood up, raised his glass, and began by saying how happy he was to be among family and friends. He congratulated my husband and me on our marriage. Then he continued, expressing how proud he was of how I had supposedly changed my life by marrying my boss. He spoke about how ashamed he was when I said I wanted a career, and how, in his view, I had disgraced the family. In conclusion, he announced that he now forgave me because I had finally chosen the path he and Mom had always dreamed of. The room fell silent. His words hung in the air, and he had no idea that this evening was about to take a completely different turn, one he was clearly not prepared for. When he finished his speech, a respectful but tense pause filled the room. Most guests assumed I would stand up and thank him, but I had completely different intentions. It was time to reveal the real purpose of this event and finally speak out about the 8-year break. When all eyes turned to me, I began to speak. "Thank you, Dad, for the kind words and for being here today, but I have a confession to make." A murmur spread through the room. "Yes, I'm married," I continued. "But he's not my boss. My boss is a woman, and by the way, a very close friend. The house you saw earlier, it's hers. All that wealth, that luxurious lifestyle, it was a setup. Someone lied to you, telling you I married my boss, and I decided to play along to see what you really wanted from me. That's why I insisted on this gathering today, to reveal the truth about our family." My father's expression shifted from proud to shocked. A deathly silence filled the room. I told everyone, right there and then, how my parents had cut me off for 8 years simply because they didn't like my desire for independence and a career. But as soon as they believed I had married a rich boss, they immediately called. I revealed the real reason behind their call. They needed financial help because they couldn't afford their home. They reached out after all these years with one goal: to latch onto my wealthy husband and convince me to ask him to pay off their debts. It was a shocking revelation. As everyone processed what they had just heard, I continued. Although I didn't marry my boss like they thought, my husband and I do live a very comfortable life, and we both have high-paying jobs. I emphasize that our financial success was a result of me breaking free from my parents' control and choosing my own path, pursuing a career instead of rushing into marriage and motherhood. The room filled with mixed emotions: surprise, disbelief, understanding, and even disappointment. All eyes turned to my parents, who now looked humiliated and exposed. The guests started whispering and exchanging glances as my husband and I stood up from the table and left the house with a sense of fulfillment. I finally put an end to the facade my parents had been maintaining in front of their community for so long. This all happened last week, and the aftermath has been quite telling. Since then, many people have reached out. Most support me and admire my courage, saying I stood up for myself and spoke the truth. But my sister and some relatives think I went too far, publicly humiliating our parents. That I was wrong to go along with their lie about marrying the boss just to get revenge. Update 1. Thank you all for your responses to my post. After reading your comments and advice, I felt the urge to call my sister and share my perspective. I explained to her that I was only 19 when our parents kicked me out, and how that trauma left deep emotional scars for many years. Their decision to cut me off was based solely on my desire to pursue higher education and live differently than they wanted. It was incredibly painful. I made it clear that I never judged her for choosing marriage. It just wasn't my path. I shared how much it hurt to realize the real reason our parents wanted to reconnect after so many years. I asked Celeste if she could ever do the same to her own children, turn her back on them if they made a different choice. She seriously replied, "No." I pointed out that as a mother, she should understand how awful what our parents did to me truly was. That's why I felt the need to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. After hearing my side, my sister expressed sympathy for what I went through. I'd always kept my feelings to myself, and she had never realized the full scale of my inner conflict. Celeste admitted she had no idea how hard it had been for me all these years. Now she understood why I did what I did. While she couldn't fully justify my revenge, she promised not to hold a grudge. After that conversation, I felt lighter. As for my parents, they haven't reached out since, and I have no intention of making the first move. Considering how harshly I exposed them, I can only imagine how furious they are right now. Time will tell whether they reflect on their actions and want to rebuild our broken relationship, or just keep blaming me. For now, I'm standing my ground. I did what I believed was right, and I hope they've learned their lesson. Today, my mom called me while I was at work. She said she and my dad feel humiliated in front of everyone, and that my dad is still angry with me. She kept accusing me of lying, but I reminded her that I only played along to expose their true intentions. Mom tried to defend themselves, saying they truly believed I was finally going to be a good girl, give up my career, and devote myself to family life. I made it clear I had no intention of doing that, especially now that I'm financially stable and up for a promotion. I emphasized again that I have no regrets, as this whole situation revealed the true nature of my parents. Mom also mentioned that some of our relatives and friends are now talking about what happened. Some even told them directly that what they did to me 8 years ago was awful. According to her, that only made my dad even angrier. I didn't want to continue the conversation, knowing it would go nowhere, so I simply hung up. I had no desire to waste my workday on a fruitless argument. My parents are stuck in their beliefs, and I'm firm in mine. But I was glad that thanks to my confession, the ice started to melt. Not just within our family, but among everyone who knew what had happened. Update 2. 3 months have passed since the last update, and much has changed. Taking the advice of many of you, I decided to start therapy. I realized I hadn't been coping well with my parents' rejection all these years, and the lingering pain weighed heavily on me. Yes, I exposed the truth about my parents' motives, but I didn't want to keep living clinging to that resentment. Therapy has been a step toward a healthier way of processing the past and my emotions. My parents agreed to sit down and talk, mainly due to my sister's heartfelt requests. At first, I was hesitant, but my husband convinced me to give them a chance. We all gathered at my sister's house, and I chose to stay silent until my parents spoke first. My mom started. She expressed regret over all our past conflicts, something that truly surprised me. She admitted she had done a lot of reflection and realized how much their actions had hurt me. Now she understands the pain they caused. My father, who had been quiet until then, acknowledged that cutting off communication for 8 years was a mistake and that they want to make things right. He explained that their strong beliefs had blinded them to my side of the story. I mostly listened rather than spoke. Their words sounded sincere, and it was a positive start to the conversation. My parents shared that they had sought advice from people in their community, which helped them see things differently. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was a first step towards some kind of reconciliation. My sister clearly felt relief at how the conversation was going. She didn't say much, but stayed close, supporting us. I could tell how much she hoped I could rebuild a connection with our parents. Seeing her optimism was encouraging. Maybe, with time and effort, our family can truly heal and reconnect. I'll continue going to therapy and stay open to a possible reconciliation with my parents, but I'll approach it with caution. For those wondering, my husband and I are doing great. Our marriage brings only joy, and he always supports my decisions. I'm truly lucky to have him as a partner. We're not thinking about kids yet, but we're not ruling it out for the future. For now, we're just enjoying life and traveling the world together. That's all for now. Thanks for watching this video till the end. Subscribe and good luck.